This week's theme was to be weird things happened in a countryside village, a theme I already dealt with once in my episode 76. But then I realized all the stories I collected are told as happened to young kids, so it became quite unintentionally a follow-up to the last week's episode about weird childhood memories. Countryside in Korea has a particular image. During the economic boom, most younger generation left their hometown for a better education and work opportunity, and by the second generation of such migrants, countryside became the place where grandparents live, a place to visit on traditional holidays, and spend summer vacations in. It's all wholesome, but hidden behind the ideal picture were also declining farming industry, aging population, and a sense of left behind from the relative prosperity and modernization of big cities. All of those are not unique to Korea, but I still wanted to mention them as some of today's stories have the relative poverty and backwaterness of these small villages as the backdrop. And seemingly, in these little villages where old ways of life carries on, sometimes something remarkable happens. Indeed, some of today's stories are truly weird. So, here are 4 allegedly true stories from Korea about weird and scary childhood memories from countryside villages. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by your host, Anthony. My family home is not far from a little mountain, which serves as our family cemetery, complete with a small temple for memorial plaques. But for me and my younger brother, the mountain was a wonderful playground more than anything else. Whenever we were going out to play in the mountain, the adults would tell us the same thing time after time. That if we hear somebody calling for us in the mountain, we should not reply till we hear the 4th call. I think it was when I was 9. One afternoon, I, with my brother, went to play in the mountain as usual. We roamed around the tall grassland, making away with a stick as we went. We had so much fun that we didn't even realize the dusk was already setting. We realized it only when it got really dark. Little brother fretted that we should go back home, and I tried to play the big brother, leading the way through the tall grass. But oddly, the way didn't lead back down. It felt like we were keep looping around the same way. It was getting darker and darker, brother more and more tearful, while I was getting confused and anxious. Then I saw a whitish figure far away. An old man? Actually, he looked like our neighbor. What a relief! I was about to run towards him, when I heard him calling my name. Mingyu. I didn't answer. Something wasn't right. I never knew one could speak in such a dry voice, devoid of any emotion. And come to think of it, our neighbor never called us by our name. Actually, I think he didn't remember our names, and he always addressed us as little puppies. The man carried on calling out my name in exactly the same dry, monotonous tone. Mingyu. Mingyu. I looked at him trembling, before I could grab my brother and run the opposite direction. I heard a rustling footstep through the grass behind us, and I ran even harder, beyond what my 9-year-old self ever could. By the time we reached home, it was well past the dinner time, and we were harshly reprimanded by my grandma. I tried to explain that we met the older neighbor in the mountain, but Grandma only scolded me more for lying, that the neighbor was off to see his son in other town. Now I'm an adult, but I still don't understand what happened that day. What was it that took on the shape of the neighbor? It's from when I was 11. I still get nightmares about it occasionally. My dad's business got hit hard by the financial crisis in 1997, and we had to move to Grandpa's in the countryside, the place I used to just visit for holidays and relax, all at once became the symbol of bankruptcy and poverty. Money issues always bring out the worst in a relationship. My parents started quarreling frequently, and I could hardly see the comforting smile on Dad's face. And one evening I ran out to escape the disheartening scene of my parents arguing with each other. Grandpa's house was sitting at the foot of a mountain, large part of which belonged to the family with the tombs of the family ancestors. I ran to the mountain and hid myself in the bamboo forest. Fortunately, it was the night of the full moon, and apart from the attacks from mosquitoes, I wasn't particularly scared. Then I heard my dad calling out my name, clearly searching for me. I stood up to check, and he wasn't very far, just about 200 meters away. Suddenly, I felt a chill and looked back. There was a strange man with a beast in white fur. I'm not so sure if it was a dog, cat, or a weasel. The man was in hanbok, the traditional dress, and staring at me. He then grabbed me by my wrist and started just dragging me away without a word. His hand felt like stone, something unbreakably hard, and the drag from him was also fittingly felt like it were from a very heavy mass. So I was dragged out of the forest and onto the field. My dad found us and caught up. He first shouted at me for running away and said something to the man in hanbok. Strangely enough, neither of us remember what he said then. The next moment, I froze with a shock to see the man in hanbok grab my dad by his collar and throw him down to the ground. Now, my dad is 178 centimeters tall, not a short man for his generation, and really pretty sporty, having some experience in combat sports under his belt. And this strange guy lifted Dad up and threw him down with a single hand. My dad got up and dashed at him, but he had no chance against the man in hanbok. He would pick Dad up like he were a little child and threw him down time after time. I went at him too, punching him and crying to stop hurting my dad. My fists ached like I was hitting a rock. But I didn't stop. The man looked at me and said with no hint of panting or breathlessness,
"Will you take his place then?"
My dad broke hearing that. He shouted and begged that I was but a little boy, he shouldn't touch me. And then he told me to run away, go to Mom and run away together with her and my younger brother. I've never seen Dad in such a state. He crawled over and held onto the strange man's leg, who regardless marched towards me, dragging Dad along on the ground. Then he kicked Dad away, which made Dad roll good few meters. The scene scared me to death. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. I screamed to stop, but in that quiet little country village, nobody responded to my scream, and not a single dog barked, as if I and my dad were the last two in the whole village. Grandpa's house was not even far, but there was absolutely no sign of Mom, Grandpa, or Grandma. I was overwhelmed by the whole situation beyond my comprehension and just dropped on the ground. Grandpa's dog Kapdol ran towards faster than I ever seen him running. He barked at the man, though he was clearly scared and shaking himself. The presence of something familiar in otherwise uncanny situation relieved my panic. Regardless, the man grabbed the back of my neck, and Kapdol the dog finally jumped at him, baring his teeth. Kapdol would have been no match in power, but he was more agile, and their confrontation carried on for a long time. In the end, the man's trousers got ripped and torn, while Kapdol's white coat bore blotches of blood. But the inevitable end came. Kapdol was thrown down one time too many, and he couldn't get up. I just cried. The sense of facing something unbeatable left me helpless. Suddenly, all the dogs in the neighborhood seemed going uproar. I noticed the dawn was breaking. Soon dogs were there out in the field, barking at the man. The man in hanbok kept staring at me all the while, but was gone when I turned my eyes back from the sight of the dogs running over. Dad was bedridden for days, despite he didn't seem to sustain any obvious injury, which was in itself impossible, considering how many times he was struck down. Mom reported the incident to the police, but in the small village surrounded by mountains, where a dog barking from one end could be literally heard at the other end, nobody said they saw or heard anything. My hero, Kapdol, couldn't even get up afterwards and died after a week. Not only he, all the other dogs that came out to the field died off one by one, all of them for no apparent reason. The consensus of the village adults was that it couldn't have been a human. They decided to perform a ritual, but at least a dozen shamans called in for the task took one look around and ran away, saying they couldn't do it. One of them asked Dad to bring out a bottle of rice wine. She drank it to the bottom on the spot and spit it out with swears. "I can't! I just can't! You all go die or run away from this damned place! I don't know. I'm too loyally fucked because of you!" Before she went away. A few days later, detectives visited us. Apparently, the shaman went missing after visiting our village. In the end, the incident remains unexplained. I tried to talk about it to Dad, but he would keep his mouth shut with a grim face. He would just say that there's something in life that I'd better just forget. But I can't. I still see that man in hanbok in my dreams sometimes. I don't know if it's a warped memory, but his bluish face still paralyzes me in the dream. My family lived in a small countryside village. When I was little, it was well before the internet or mobile phones. Life was simpler then, and my biggest joy was waiting for my dad coming back from work. He loved his drinks and often came home late in his drunken pace, but he never forgot to bring sweets for us, usually what we called eyeball candies, something equivalent to Jawbreaker's candy. Kids nowadays won't even give a second look at such a humble sweets, but for me at the time, that big mouthful of hard candy was enough to keep me happy all day. That evening, after dinner, I was waiting for Dad under the big willow tree at the edge of the village. Guess I was a bit bored that day, and just wanted to have the taste of the candy before my brother and sister. Dad soon came along the dirt road in his drunken man's steps. "Daddy, you didn't forget the candies, did you? I said.
Here's my boy. Oh, are you waiting for Dad or the candy, huh?
Dad said. He grabbed me and lifted up in his arms, puffing his alcohol breath to my face. "Oh, Daddy, give me the candy. I've been waiting all day long," I said. But the more I nagged, the more Dad seemed to enjoy teasing me and wouldn't let me free from his bear hug. And out of blue, I felt sudden chill, as if somebody was watching us. I instinctively looked up at the willow tree and saw a dark silhouette of a person in the tree against the moonlit sky. It was a little boy, just about 5 or 6 years old, sitting cross-legged on a tree branch. He was staring down at me, not even blinking. I took a second and third look to make sure if I was seeing what I was seeing really. "Hey, what are you doing up there?" I called to the boy. Guess I wanted to break this uncanny sense, but the boy didn't react. "Are you stuck up there? Shall we help you down?" I called out once again, but he still didn't respond. Dad finally noticed me talking up the tree and looked up himself. "Dad, there's a boy stuck on the tree. Help him down." Dad frowned to look closely where I was pointing, but soon replied,
Boy? What boy? Now stop the nonsense and let's go home.
Maybe I mistook it after all. I took Dad's hand and walked along the dirt road across the farming field. Time was passing 10, and moon reflected on the wet rice field was the only guiding light for us. Frogs were croaking as usual. I heard something dragging on the ground behind me, and it sounded like it was following us. When I stopped, the sound also stopped, and when I started walking, it started again too. It wasn't uncommon to run into a deer, bull, or even a fox occasionally in that country village, but this sounded somewhat different. But I didn't want to look back to check. All I wanted was to go back home as soon as possible and enjoy the candy with my brother and sister. While I slowed down thinking all this, Dad was walking ahead of me. Now the dragging noise was clearly closing in. I unwittingly looked back and screamed. It was that boy in the willow tree, but he was walking on all fours. His eyes were all black, and his lips were smiling ear to ear. Literally. "Dad! Dad!" I called out and ran to him. But Dad wasn't there. The dragging noise got much faster and closer, and I just ran for my life. My slippers flew away and my bare feet hurt running on the dirt road, but that wasn't the problem in that moment. I managed to get back home, and only after locking up the front gate behind me, I could collapse on the ground, catching breath. I still could not understand what had just happened. What was that thing, the boy, and where was Dad gone? It was then I saw Dad walking out of his room. He seemed genuinely surprised to find me there.
Where have you been? You should tell me first if you should go somewhere. What have you been doing for a whole 1 hour? It's late. Go to bed,
he said, and went into the toilet, which was in a separate building. It was all beyond my comprehension. I just wanted to believe it was all but a nightmare, and slept next to Mom that night, trying to forget it all. Following morning, Dad found something stuck outside the locked front gate. It was an old tattered broomstick, with the dark brown stains and wrapped around with strings.
Who the heck left such a damned thing here? Thank God the gate was locked,
Dad said. He promptly tossed it to a garbage pile and set fire. I silently watched it burning, sensing what I experienced the previous night was not a dream after all. I felt something in my trousers pocket. It was the eyeball candy I forgot to eat the previous night. I unwrapped it and popped it in my mouth. I guess that was the first time the candy tasted bittersweet. When I was about 6, I apparently almost drowned in the nearby river. Fortunately, the river was neither very deep nor fast, and a young woman rescued me. Or so I'm told. To be honest, I don't really remember, probably because I was too young. What I remember is that I started to get this particular dream since then, in which many a tentacle-like white hand reached out from the pitch dark to grab my body. It occurred so often that I didn't feel anyway scared of it anymore after some time. A few years later, my parents' business collapsed and they had to start anew away in a bigger town. I was just starting my primary school, but always rather sickly and weak. Frequent visits to hospitals did little for me, and in the end it was decided that I go and live with my grandma in the countryside until my parents managed to settle down. I loved my grandma, she adored me, so it wasn't really too terrible for me. At the time, countrysides were really countrysides. My family wasn't very well off, and in that old farmhouse of my grandparents, using furnace was still the norm to cook and heat. One day I was bored and was playing at the kitchen furnace with no fire on. I pulled out some dried straws, shaped it like a doll, and drew matches on them to burn them to death. Morbid? Well, that's me. Suddenly I noticed something crawling out from the dark black hole of the furnace. Something familiar. Long white tentacles of hands from my recurring dream. Despite its tentacle-like fluid movement, it actually moved quickly, and its nails plowed the dirt in front of the furnace. I was startled and fell back on my bums away from the furnace, while the hands were kept trying to snatch me. From there I could see the deep inside of the furnace. In the dark were 2 red eyes. It withdrew its white hands slowly and started to whisper in a low voice.
Pretty boy, come on here, my baby.
It sounded like a mother cooing her baby. Whenever its mouth opened to speak, I could see it darker than the darkness in the depth of the furnace.
Come to mommy, come.
It opened its white arms, and despite of myself, my body moved forward towards them.
Get away, damned thing!
It was my grandma. She whipped the white hands with a stick of wood repeatedly, but they were not phased at all and kept stretching out towards me.
Come, sweet baby.
Grandma grabbed me by my hand and dragged me out of the kitchen. She took me straight to her room. She was pretty superstitious, and in her room were numerous yellow talismans. Actually, on the kitchen wall above the furnace was another talisman, and it probably stopped the hands reaching further out. Grandma told me not to leave the room. Left alone in the room, I was still in a shock. But then, I could hear its whisper again.
My sweet baby, who took away my baby?
It was from right under the floor of the room. The kitchen furnace tunneled under the floor of the room to heat it up as well. And there it was now underneath me. The nails scratched under the floor. It was frightening beyond belief, but I could not dare to run out either, and I had to shiver in that room left alone with the whispers and scratch noises. What woke me up was the fresh air coming in from the open door. A strange woman in a colorful dress was standing there. Her face was powdered white, lips rouged bloody red, and she was carrying a big knife looking like a machete. She was clearly younger than my grandma by decades, but she spoke to her in a blunt manner. "That's the boy?" said she.
Yes, he's my dear youngest. Please save him," said Grandma.
Have you gone blind with age? You have left him in that state and call him dear, eh?
What are you saying?
Look at him! All sorts of unholy things are stuck at him, sucking up his life. What kind of dumb blind doesn't see it? Thought you were a bit smarter when young. Now you've gone stupid with age.
Grandma only lowered her head even at such rude comment from the woman.
Let's take all those unholy things off of him and then deal with that damned bitch in the furnace. How dare the dead one calling the living boy hers?
Roared the woman and stepped in the room. Strangely, I felt already alert, unlike my usual tired and hazy condition I had been in those days. Voice from the under the floor rang out again, but this time it was screaming.
No! Give back my child! It's mine! It's mine!
With that, the scratching got wilder, so fierce that it felt like it would break the floor and shoot up from the underneath any second. The strange woman didn't seem to give a damn of it all, and started making gestures of taking something off of me. Each time she did it, I really felt lighter and cleaner. I was too young to have any understanding of ghosts or shamanism, and I can't believe it was mere my imagination.
God, there are a lot, these water ghosts. You can't have him on the dry land,
she shouted, and motioned the picking things up from the floor and went out. She wrapped those invisible things with a pink scarf and a couple of talismans from her bosom and burnt it in the courtyard. Now she took my hand and guided me to the kitchen.
I told you, dumb old bone, not to let the boy in the kitchen. It's a dangerous one full of grudge, and naturally it got all mad seeing this boy all weak after having almost drowned and then left sucked up dry by water ghosts.
The woman further shouted at Grandma and had me sit in front of the furnace.
Do you see that?
She said.
Yes,
I mumbled. Indeed, I could still clearly see that thing. It seemed scared to reach out again, but not long after, its hands shot out again, saying,
My dear baby.
The strange woman's machete flashed. She shouted,
Damned soul! Go back to where you belong!
This time, the machete actually cut off its arms, and it screamed like mad.
Listen up! That bitch can't crawl out of the furnace. It'll be okay as long as young kids are not around,
said the woman. She gave a look of daggers to that thing, now retreated in the furnace, panting hard, and then picked up the cut-off arms to put them in a small coffin she brought in. She put a talisman on it and tied it up.
Plus, what can it do now without the hands? Just make sure the talisman stay on the wall,"
was her last word. Later I learned that it was an unwritten rule in the family that boys stay away from the kitchen. But Grandma herself had become lax over the years from the rule that came down from previous generation, and forgot to warn me. After all, none of my cousins had ever seen the thing before me. That's already 20 years ago. Meanwhile, Grandma passed away, the old house was demolished with its kitchen and furnace and all, and the scary memory has become just a good story to recount over a drink with friends. Or so it was until recently. I started having dreams in which something hugging me from behind and whispers,
"My baby, Mommy's back. I've missed you. Come with me now. Come with me."
And then, from a few days ago, it started to whisper this.
"That bitch is dead now. Just wait till I get my hands back."
I really don't know what to do now. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. It's not uncommon at all to read you most unlikely stories on my channel, but some of today's stories, like the weird strong man or a resentful soul in furnace, were truly strange that I actually find hard to believe myself. What do you think? Could such a thing really happen? Especially, what do you think the strong kidnapper would have been? Because he seems out of character of usual ghosts. Maybe a tokebi? Let me know your thoughts in the comment. If you enjoyed my work, please give it a like and a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel. Also, feel free to explore my past episodes and share them with your fellow horror or Asian culture-loving friends. If you'd support me more directly, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link's in the description. Buy Me a Coffee supporters are getting an early access to my new videos. Thank you. Winter is still raging where I am, and you may hear a touch of lingering cold in my voice. Hope you keep warm and well, and see you again on Sunday.